Okay, I will call the meeting to order, and I guess we need to take roll call, Chris. So,
All right, sounds good. Let's see, Christopher Bowker yet. Counselor Brake.
Here.
Richard Craven. Okay, so I see him. I saw the wave. Greg DiLoretto.
here.
Anthony Fields. See ya. Counselor Golaby.
Here.
Brian Johnson. See ya. Mayor Milch.
Here. Here we go.
Michael Morrow.
No.
Colleen Rockwell.
Here.
Neil Schulman.
Yeah, Neil's here.
Okay.
Here. Talking while I'm muted. Apologies.
No worries. That's perfect. All right. We have a quorum. We're ready to get going.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Greg Geist, who's going to give a director report.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. So obviously, this meeting is going to be focused on our budget. We're going to be focused on capital projects in July, but I did want to give a couple updates. I'll start with our Solve kickoff event that we had at May 7th at Meldrum Bar, where we collected over 791 pounds of trash. That's going to conclude back in Gladstone at High Rocks in September. I don't know the exact date, but we'll get that out for folks if you want to participate. So that was a fun day. The diffusers for the outfall that will go in the river this summer should be on site within a month or so. And so we expect once we can get back in the water, we'll install those diffusers at the bottom of the river and have that part of that project done in October by the end of the in-water work window. And we're nearing completion of the trenching for the pipeline back to the facility. So that's all exciting. We also kicked off our Upper Kellogg kind of flood mitigation and stream restoration project. We are still waiting for our in-water permits for that project, but we expect that to be imminent and have that done by the end of the summer, which is exciting. I think that's about all I've got. We're also, as many of you know, doing the Clean Water Exchange sessions with folks and getting your ideas about how to make WES better. So always excited to do that. We do that every few years, kind of calibrates us and gives us some aspirational goals moving forward. So looking forward to that. The last thing I wanted to mention quickly is the recommendation from this advisory committee on the SDCs last time was to phase the full SDC in over 5 years. The board is very sensitive right now to any kind of increases. And so their decision was to phase it in over 10 years to be revisited in 1 year. So Erin will get into all that in her part of the talk, but I just wanted to let you know, I think this is the first time that the board hasn't directly taken an advisory committee recommendation. From a financial standpoint, it's not very impactful for us as far as us delivering our capital plan. But that was the direction that they took. Close, but not quite what you guys recommended. So that's it.
And
thank you.
The Solve wrap up is October 15th.
Oh, October. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Greg, I was gonna, if I could ask a quick question. Greg, I was gonna ask if you had if you're still on course for Three Creeks construction this in water work period as well.
Yes, as far as I know. Ron, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, we just bid the project and had a responsive bid, and we're negotiating the contract, but we should be hopefully within the in-water work window to start some of it this year, and it'll definitely go into next year as well. So we're in good shape.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Any other questions for Greg? If not, we will move to approving the March minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look at those? And if so, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Okay, Aaron, I mean, not Aaron, Chris, take the roll call.
Surprise, Aaron. No, just kidding. All right, I'll take roll on minutes. Christopher Bowker,
Aye.
Christina Brown,
Aye.
Counselor Brake,
Yes.
Richard Craven. Is that a yes? Affirmative.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Thumbs up. Greg DiLoretto,
Yes.
Tony Fields,
Yes.
Counselor Golaby,
Aye.
Brian Johnson,
Aye.
Mayor Milch,
Yes.
Catherine Miller,
Yes.
Michael Morrow,
Yes.
Colleen Rockwell,
Yes.
Neil Schulman.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll move to public comment. Do we have any public comment, Chris?
Is anybody from the public, please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. And I don't see any hands raised.
Just us. Okay, then we'll move on to the portion of the agenda, do the budget presentation, and I'll turn the meeting over to Aaron.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I am excited to be presenting our annual budget update. Next slide, please. So Ron sent an email out to all of you last week that let you know that tonight's presentation will be a little bit different than prior years. And in an earlier iteration of this presentation, I had prepared an agenda slide that was lipogrammatic and omitted the letter E because I thought it might be a little awkward to give a budget update without actually talking about the budget. But over the course of the last couple of weeks, I think we've come up with a really data-rich presentation that focuses on more general trends, background information, all the inputs that go into developing the budget, so much so that my goal is that when you look at the actual budget after tonight's presentation, it will just seem obvious to you. You'll know exactly how we arrived at it and all the underlying factors. So tonight we'll be going over budget process and development, financial trends, including both expenditures and revenues, and then conclude with rates and also our long-term outlook over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. Kind of a reminder of where we are in the budget process. The budget takes up about 6 months out of each year. We kick it off in January with meetings with our management team, and then our management team starts to develop the budget for each of their programs. We have our numbers pretty well locked by the end of February, and from there we go into review with our county administrator. We had an advisory committee meeting in March that we typically do a budget preview at, where we go over some economic factors and other forecasting items. We didn't have time this year, so some of that information has been rolled into tonight's presentation. So tonight is the budget update presentation. It is not an opportunity to discuss any of the particulars in the budget. That will occur at the May 27th Budget Committee meeting. And I want to thank the advisory committee members who are also our budget committee members, Christopher Bowker, Carol Brake, William Gifford, Neil Showman, and Denise McGriff for their participation in those extra meetings and that extra input that they provide as members of that committee. The final step in the budget process is adoption, which will occur on June 18th by WES's board, and then we'll begin the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So we talk a lot about our planning, so the inputs here should all be familiar to you. And we have structured a lot of the advisory committee meetings around these plans to ensure that they're reflecting advice from this committee and our community's priorities. So there are no surprises in the budget. Each of these items is pretty discreetly obvious. The 5-year capital improvement plan is the basis for our annual capital budget each year. That plan was approved by the advisory committee in November 2024 and then adopted by our board in February. Our strategic plan ties our budget together. It also ties our budget and long-range financial planning back to our vision and our mission. Every line item that we budget for ties back to our strategic plan in one way or another, whether it's budgeting to realize an initiative in there or carrying out the fundamentals of our vision and mission. That plan was, of course, reviewed by the advisory committee back in January 2023. It was adopted in late 2023, and that goes through June 30th of 2026. So we will start to update our strategic plan over this next year. Financial policies are pretty static. We do review those periodically and then update. The last update that we had involving this committee was back in January 2022. In the past couple of years, the county has adopted a new cost recovery policy, which we've folded into WES's budget and financial planning as it applies to rates. Next slide, please. Another key factor in development is our long-range financial plan, which is outlined on this slide. And that's the 5 objectives that we use to ensure that first, we're meeting all necessary operating needs and delivering our essential wastewater and surface water management services to the community. We're meeting all capital needs. We're building the infrastructure for new growth, and we're also maintaining infrastructure to ensure reliability of services. We're honoring our foundational commitments around the legacy debt payments and providing services in the most cost-effective manner over the long term. Next slide, please. And kind of some background information on WES as context for the rate slides that we'll see later. WES is divided into 3 rate zones, and that's based on the different levels of services that we provide to each rate zone. Rate zone 1 consists of our city partners, Gladstone, Westland, and Oregon City. We provide wholesale wastewater treatment to those 3 cities, and they each have their own collection systems that they maintain and that they charge their residents for. In rate zone 2, which is Happy Valley, rate zone 2A is Johnson City and the city of Milwaukee. We provide wastewater treatment in rate zone 2 for our retail population. We also provide wastewater collection and surface water management services. And then finally, rate zone 3 is a relatively minor part of our service area, large in size, small in number of households served because it's primarily rural, and we provide surface water management to that service area. Next slide, please. So our financial structure, we're organized into funds, and a fund is just a self-balancing set of accounts organized for a specific purpose that can either be operational or statutory. Statutory in the case of system development charge funds, operational in the case of separating sanitary sewer and surface water funds. We segregate all of the resources we receive and all the requirements we have to ensure that we're maintaining accurate cost of service models for each of our 2 primary services. So all money from sanitary sewer ratepayers goes into our sanitary sewer operating fund. All money from surface water ratepayers goes into the surface water operating fund. It's a really transparent way to maintain our finances, and it is audited each year by our external auditors. Once we receive the money into our operating funds, we then transfer it to the debt service fund to meet current year debt service payments for principal and interest. And then we also transfer into the construction fund to provide for pay-as-you-go capital financing or to increase construction fund reserves for future capital projects. System development charges are segregated under statute. All SDC fees are received into the SDC fund, and from there we either spend them on eligible capital projects or eligible transfers to the debt service fund to make principal and interest payments on debt that was used to finance SDC eligible infrastructure. Next slide, please. So when we're developing the budget, we're thinking about how to address both near-term and longer-term challenges. And the items on this slide are not new. In fact, these have been factors for the last several years, but they are ever evolving. And so the specific circumstances that we find ourselves in now, we're thinking about rate increases and affordability. 5% rate increases are what we've been projecting in our long-range financial planning for the last several years. And that's what we'll be heading into this next year with a projection for. We are continuing to reduce the legacy debt component each year as we're phasing that out to harmonize rates so that we charge the same for services received regardless of where someone lives. And then as Greg shared, system development charges are awaiting action by the board in August 2025. So whereas we would normally have a proposal for next year's SDCs incorporated into the budget, it was a placeholder only this year since we're doing that larger SDC methodology update. Most of WES's infrastructure was originally constructed in the 70s and 80s. Many of you attended WES's Kellogg Creek wastewater treatment plant facility 50th birthday last year. Tri-Cities, I think, is next year or the year after. So we are continuing to invest in renewing and replacing that aging infrastructure as part of our capital improvement plan. And then we're also trying to meet the needs for our growing service area. We have growth occurring in every rate zone. Well, not so much rate zone 3, but certainly our cities, city partners, and unincorporated area are experiencing growth. And we're expanding the treatment capacity and our collection system to accommodate that growth. We have, for the last couple of years, had slower development activity that's impacted system development charge revenues. We are also starting to notice a trend towards more multifamily development and lower single-family residential permitting activity, which aligns with some of the priorities of the commissioners to increase affordable housing and provide some incentives for multifamily development. Utility costs have increased an average of 8.7% over the past 5 calendar years. Those are the costs that PGE charges us as an industrial electricity customer. So we saw a 37% increase over that time total, 8.7% per year. So we're continuing to experience some pressures there. Utility costs make up a large portion of our operating budget, as you'll see on an upcoming slide. So that does factor heavily into our planning. And then finally, labor cost increases are driven by a number of items, underlying cost of living adjustments based on contracted bargaining agreements, as well as a major effort that WES is undergoing to do market analyses to maintain competitive salaries and ensure that we're aligned with other agencies that are doing similar services. Our service area grows every year. Our infrastructure grows every year. We occasionally have to increase staffing to ensure that we're maintaining and operating our system. So we'll see some of the staffing increases that we've experienced in the past on an upcoming slide. Next slide, please. So a lot of tonight's presentation focuses on financial trends. We don't look forward, but we are looking back. And that's interesting because it's the data that we use each year when we're putting together the budget. So we're looking back at what's happened over the past few years in an attempt to get some information that we can use to forecast for the upcoming year. We also use a kind of 5-year look back in terms of the inflationary or the index assumptions for our long-range financial planning. The past 5 years has had some atypical inflation and supply chain pressures that have really that have increased costs beyond what we would normally see. So we do temper the actual increases with what we think might occur in the future. So it's our best guess, best educated and informed guess about what might happen. And then financial trends are also the basis for various targets, both in our financial plan, in our financial policies, mandated through our debt service agreements, and then kind of just financial best practices. And we'll be going over some of those next. Next slide, please. So 2 of the financial trends that we keep a close eye on and that are also in our strategic plan are tracking operating budget and spending and capital budget and spending. And these are important because the operating budget is the basis for our 10-year financial forecast. So we index that, and that's what goes into creating the 10-year revenue requirements. The more accurate we are with our budgeting and our operating budget, the more accurate our long-range forecast, the more accurate our rate predictions are to ensure that we're collecting only enough to meet needs and not over-collecting. So we did struggle in the past to meet our target, which is 10%. We had initially set a target of 15% back in 2016-17 when we adopted this financial metric. We did make that, so we lowered the target to 10%, and then we had some challenges because we run such high vacancy counts. In 22-23, we started considering frictional vacancies, which is kind of the term that we use to describe natural attrition that occurs throughout the year. So unexpected retirements or promotions that will result in a vacancy that we don't necessarily plan for, but because our population of staff is large enough, it tends to occur. So we're now incorporating a 5% frictional vacancy rate into our planning assumptions, and that's helped us get our operating budget and spending meeting target. So we realized our target of 10% back in 22-23, 23-24, we improved that to 7.2% because simultaneous to incorporating the frictional vacancy, our program managers have also really honed in their discretionary budgets and budgeting assumptions. So we're getting better, we're getting more precise, and then we've implemented some of these financial planning mechanisms that helps us stay on target. This year, we're projecting 3.6%. We still have a little bit of time left this year, but I think we're going to be right on target, or at least under 5%. For capital spending, the objective there is really a measure of the effectiveness of project delivery in comparison to our planned capital spending in the CIP. And then we're also wanting to ensure that our financial forecasting is accurate on the capital level too. So we know that those that are capital planning is reasonable so that we can project when we might actually need to issue debt. And you can see we've really improved there as well. Back in 2021, 21, 22, we were below 50% of our capital budget. We did lower the target with the new strategic plan, and we're scaling in, as you can see on this slide. We had a goal of 50% for 2024. It's increasing. It'll increase up to 80% eventually, and we think that's where we're going to end this year. So it was a challenge in prior years. We had some delays. The construction season, of course, splits the fiscal year, so we can have some timing differences between one fiscal year or another. And then we had some staffing. We had vacancies on our capital team. We increased staffing on capital team in 23-24, and that's helped measurably as well. There are also some things that are outside of our control that impact capital budget and spending, including an agreement that we have with the Oregon Department of Transportation for the I-205 bridge project. And they haven't spent that according to their schedule, so that's also impacted our budget a little bit. Next slide, please.
Hey, Erin, quick question. If anybody does have a question, is it okay to ask, raise hand, chat, or do you want to hold off and maybe just have those emailed to you, or what's your preference on questions?
Yes, sorry. I meant to say, please feel free to ask questions at any time.
Sounds good. Does anybody have a question before we move on?
I do.
Okay.
And Erin, I apologize if I missed this already, but just given the tariffs and some of the economic volatility and the potential impact on project costs and supplies and things like that, what are you forecasting right now for annual year-to-year construction inflation? And has that changed over the past several months?
That is a great question. We are using 3% for our forecast. That was updated from 2% a year ago based on the 10-year rolling actual average construction cost index from the Engineering News Record. We have seen that start to creep up over the last 6 months. The construction cost index was sub 1% year over year in December. It's now at 2.6% as of May. So we are starting to see some impacts to construction costs due to the tariffs and other economic volatility. And we do have a slide that kind of addresses some of those factors a little bit later, but it is something that we're monitoring. So far, we're not adjusting the 3% that we're using for forecasting because the year over year change is still below that, and we don't know what the future holds.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mayor Milch has his hand up.
Yes, I was wondering earlier, you mentioned staffing, labor cost increases, staffing levels, competitive salaries as being one factor that affects operating costs. And then you also talked about retirements too. How would you say we're doing as far as employee retention? Is this a situation where we train people to do a job and then they move on to another jurisdiction? Or do we have a pretty good rate of people sticking around?
Oh, that's a great question. So I don't have any specific figures or data to share with you. I can certainly get some. We have that data. my sense is that we have extremely good employee retention. My own experience, most of the folks on my team are at least 3-year. We've people all the way up to 20, 21 years. I think we've really improved that measure over the past 2 years. There's a lot of initiatives in our strategic plan that focus on retention, developing employees. We're actively engaged in an employee engagement initiative right now where we're looking to improve our engagement scores. WES's engagement score is already pretty good. Greg, I saw you unmuted, so I'll let you jump in here.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, a couple, 2-3 years ago, we did have some folks that had left for kind of greener pastures. And that's part of the reason why we're doing the market studies and making sure that our salaries are competitive with our peers. And that seems to have been pretty darn successful. So yeah, we're very fortunate. I think we're out of 117 or so full-time equivalent employees. We are within 4 of being fully staffed, which is pretty darn good.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Okay.
Okay, so this shows our materials and services, our operating budget without labor. So all other expense categories aside from labor. You can really see the relative difference between utilities, supplies, other county services. Those make up the primary operating budget aside from labor. And the trends are interesting here because it speaks to the cost increases that we experienced. We had increases in electricity costs back in 21, 22. We also had some operational changes. That's the year that the cogeneration engine for Tri-City came online. So we were largely able to offset those. In 22, 23, we have an agreement with the city of Portland to treat a portion of WES's service area that's in the Lentz Trunk area. And they pass on a portion of their operating budget and actual expenses based on what we send to them in terms of flow. And their costs increased as a result of the cost pressures that we were seeing. So we had about a $200,000 increase in what we pay to them in 22, 23. So that's one of the reasons we see such a sharp jump in utilities that year. Supplies is primarily chemicals, and chemicals are one of the areas that was most impacted by supply chain shortages and inflation during the pandemic. So we see pretty big increases there. Other county services, we were able to reduce in 21, 22 by not renewing an agreement that we had for facilities maintenance and instead bringing that in-house. And then in 22, 23, the county updated their cost allocation methodology, which resulted in a larger portion of internal and central service costs being assigned to WES and other operating departments. So we've seen some increases there over the past few years that are outside of our control. And professional services is where our discretionary spending lies. And that really fluctuates based on completing initiatives, one-time initiatives that get completed and then aren't carried forward. We usually come in under budget there because we are more optimistic when we're budgeting and don't always get to all of the things that we're planning during that fiscal year. Administrative costs, we had an increase in overhead that was charged to capital projects, which acts as a contra to the operating budget. So there's a little bit of fluctuation there as there are changes in underlying capital project activity. Repairs and maintenance, we are seeing an increase there. We've entered into additional maintenance contracts for new equipment and are also focusing on preventative maintenance in alignment with goals in our strategic plan. So the past couple of years reflects those changes. And then rents and leases is really just the rent that we pay to the county for our administrative office at the Development Services Building, as well as some minor equipment rental expenses that we see throughout the year. The little increase in 21, 22 and 22, 23 was the result of renting an office and a shower trailer during the pandemic to enable some additional social distancing. Those leases were up in late 23, so we were able to discontinue those. Next slide, please. The largest component of WES's annual non-capital expenditures is labor. It makes up, we're projecting about $16.9 million this year. And Actually, we do have a data point that we can share. So Greg mentioned that we're down to 4 vacancies. Last year, we had 15 vacancies. So we've seen a dramatic increase in retention and the ability to complete hiring and fill those vacant positions. Back in 22, for really the past 4 years, we've had high vacancy counts. Last year, we had 10,000 more regular labor hours due to filling vacancies than we had the prior year. So we're getting more done as we fill those vacancies and are getting more staff on hand. You can see the budgeted positions by fiscal year and that chart on the upper right, and how we've increased positions in relation to the needs, additional operating needs throughout the years. The last big increase was 2 positions added in 23-24, and those were engineers on our capital team, and they have contributed to helping us deliver projects according to our capital plan. In 21-22, we added 4 positions that for WES plant maintenance folks, and those assumed the work that was being done under the county facilities intergovernmental agreement that we discontinued that year. So average annual increases in labor costs are related to a number of factors that you'll see on the next slide. Our 3-year average is about 5%, and that's what we're using in our long-range planning currently. It's been on an upward trend basis compared to the longer-term trend there. Next slide, please. So overall labor costs are driven by changes in the underlying payroll components. You can see the relative size of payroll components in the little table on the lower right. Salary is what primarily makes up the average personnel cost. Pension is a huge component for government staff, as is health insurance. We often surprise private entities that we're working with if they ask for our overhead rate for labor, and we tell them that it's 60% because that's unusual for private entities, but it's not unusual for governments. And so pension and health insurance is a large part of an employee's overall compensation. You can see that the changes in the components don't always align with each other. PERS rates are adjusted every 2 years by the state. So there's generally a larger adjustment every 2 years, and then it kind of flattens out. Other is a relatively small portion of overall labor costs that accounts for the benefit administration done by our county HR team, as well as things like disability insurance. And that actually went down in 2020-21 due to a revision in how they were passing through the benefit overhead costs. And then some of the things that offset increases that we see are changes in the mix of pension plans. So as staff that are on tier 1 or 2 tier PERS that's charged at a higher rate retire, we bring in new staff that are on tier 3 PERS that's charged at a lower rate. So we can realize some savings there, even as overall pension costs go up. The impact is somewhat buffered by changes in pension percentages. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Mayor Milch has his hand up.
Sorry. Yes, Mayor Milch.
Where are we in the collective bargaining process? Are our current salaries and benefits pretty much in place, or are things still being negotiated? Where are we in comparison with the budget schedule?
Yeah, well, so we recently ratified a 3-year contract, and Aaron can speak to the financial part of that.
Yeah, so the 3-year contract was effective back to July 1st of 2024. So this year's impact is already incorporated into the budget. It was a 4.1% COLA. The projection for the COLA next year is 2.8% based on the actual CPI for 2024. So market analyses are being done, and we expect that those will continue to impact WES's labor budget going forward. We saw a fairly big increase last fiscal year from operating personnel market analyses that were completed that resulted in salary adjustments. Okay. Next slide. All right, so moving on to debt service. The top chart here shows our bond debt service coverage ratio. We're required to maintain 120% coverage ratio within our bond covenants. Our actual coverage has been quite a bit higher than that. And actual coverage is calculated as our net revenues, which is our total operating revenues less operating expenses. And that represents the amount that's available for debt service. That's then divided by our annual principal and interest payments to get that ratio. So it represents the amount that we have available capacity to issue new debt. So we're in a really strong financial position with that healthy coverage ratio. We do maintain a AAA credit rating that was first awarded back in 2018 and then affirmed in 2021 with our last debt issuance. It's the highest credit rating, and it confers an advantage in terms of competitive interest rates, which we in turn are able to pass on to our ratepayers as lower costs. The chart on the bottom shows our outstanding principal and new debt issued over the past 10 years. We had a more serendipitous than we thought at the time issuance of debt in 2021 at the absolute market low. We issued $40 million with an $8.8 million premium at a 0.84% effective interest rate. And that is the reason for the increase in outstanding principal in 2021 that you see there. That ended up being so serendipitous because interest rates since then, of course, have increased. And interest rates on municipal bonds have increased a lot in just the past few months. In fact, they're up about 1% from a year ago, but we aren't in a position where we're going to have to issue debt anytime soon. So it would be a suboptimal time for us to issue debt. The Federal Reserve isn't anticipated to lower interest rates until probably the last quarter of 2025. So being in a position where we don't have to issue debt for another couple of years is really working to our advantage currently. The other debt that you can see there, 2018-19, represented by the orange bar, is the SRF loan that we took out for the Tri-City Solids Handling Project. We also have a little bit of orange SRF debt issued for the Three Creeks loan. We are getting the final disbursement on that loan within the next couple of weeks, and then we'll start repaying that next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So we only include expenses in the budget that we are reasonably certain will be realized. But the factors listed here are things that we think about and we plan for, not directly, indirectly through reserves and contingency that you'll see on the next slide. But we know that these can impact us financially. So we're monitoring them closely, but we don't know the magnitude or the degree of impact, so we aren't able to specifically account for them. I think tariffs is something that's been coming up a lot lately. The economy is quite volatile. I heard an economist say that they yearn for boring economic times, and that these last few months has been a challenge to be able to kind of predict where anything is going. We are starting to see some impacts from tariffs. So far, it's primarily anecdotal because there's still so much volatility in the policy. But in terms of the impacts we're seeing prices increased by the % of the tariff. So we purchased a pump from Canada. The 25% tariff was added to the price. We purchased a pump made in USA from parts from other areas, and the tariff was just added to the price of that pump. From a capital perspective, we checked in with Jeff Stallard, our capital program manager, earlier, and he relayed that most of our major capital projects are still in the design phase, or we're already under contract for them with pre-tariff prices. So we're largely insulated in terms of capital spending from sudden cost increases. The one exception is the IT2 pump station, where a change order for tariff-related price increases is expected. Looking ahead, though, we are expecting that higher steel, electrical, and pump equipment costs and longer delivery schedules will impact our builds. So we're pre-procuring long lead items like transformers and variable frequency drives to lock in prices. We also have an initiative in our strategic plan to build a critical spare parts inventory. That was something that we had identified a need for long before this late economic volatility, but is really underscored the importance of in the past few months. So we're working on diversifying our supply chains, and ensuring that we have those parts on hand so that if we do run into supply chain issues or sudden cost increases, we're insulated from those. Next slide, or actually, to touch on federal grants, WES does not rely on federal grants for funding. Oh, sorry, Neil.
Yeah.
You were in the sentence that might have the answer to my question. So I was going to ask if WES, I know WES doesn't rely much on federal grants, but what about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and a lot of which is actually sourced through the federal government?
Yeah, great question. We reached out to SRF and we asked them how much of their fund was revolving. So that's been paid back and is available to distribute without impact from federal funding versus how much is federally funded. And they didn't directly answer the question, but they said they don't anticipate that they believe there's a lot of support at the congressional level for continuing funding of the SRF program and aren't really worried about losing that funding. They're projecting $40 million in federal funding for next fiscal year. Ron and I were looking at the total funding available in the SRF earlier today, and they have 175 million net available to loan during the current year. So if the $40 million federal budget were like taken out of the picture entirely, it would have some impact, but the majority of their funds are revolving. So there would still be some resources there. Definitely something that we're keeping our eye on. In terms of federal grants, we have an earmark for our boring facility, and we were able to get a technical change approved for that. We're proceeding with preparing an application as soon as we have the scope of work finalized for that project. And at this moment, it looks like we will be able to access those funds. There have been federal earmarks that have been pulled back, particularly around ARPA. I think a lot of folks are familiar that if you didn't have your ARPA funds obligated by the end of last calendar year, those would be clawed back, and that has occurred. WES was able to obligate 100% of our ARPA funds, so we're on track to realize the benefit as we spend those over the next 2 years. We keep an eye on state legislative actions that it might impact revenue. There's a lot of potential legislature around SDCs when amounts are collected. There's some legislature around mandating or limiting utility cost increases, particularly around energy cost increases related to wildfires. So we're keeping an eye on those items as well. There isn't anything definite that we know about right now. Okay, and Christopher.
Yeah, you touched on so when you chatted with Jeff, he had mentioned most of the capital projects are in the design phase, and it just had me wondering, and looking at the proposed budget with some of the graphs, it looks like the current fiscal year is sort of the highest, the most expenditures, the most expensive year, and it starts decreasing. And I was just curious, can you comment with all the capital projects that you have going on right now, have you noticed either like trends, or are you having to sort of push things off to help balance the budget, or maybe just resources, things like that? As in, like, have there been unanticipated delays to the capital program?
That's a really good question. So one of the reasons that this year is so high is because of the schedule for the Tri-City outfall. So we're anticipating spending of about 50 million just this fiscal year on that project. So that was under contract quite a while ago. We aren't really seeing any delays there. That's being completed on time. In terms of other upcoming projects, Greg, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the big thing for this year. And, you know, our Clackamas area interceptor project is under design. We're in construction on the Intertie 2 project, and there are some impacts there. But yeah, I mean, we're luckily relatively unscathed.
Next slide, please. Although we don't specifically budget for the unknowns that we went over on the last slide, we do have a financial planning mechanism to mitigate risk related to those, and that's contingency and reserves. We're in a really strong financial position. We've been intentionally building reserves since the last major capital work that we did in 2010, 2011 around the liquids expansion at Tri-City, anticipating the needs that we have in the adopted capital improvement plan. So you can see the impact of debt issuance in 2021 that brought our reserves up. We also were spending lower amounts. We were in the design phase for several projects back in 2021 and 21-22. So reserves continue to build. We are now starting to spend those down, but we're still in a position where we have enough to fund our immediate needs without needing to issue new debt. We budget for a contingency each year, which provides for unforeseen or unanticipated expenses that might occur or decreases that might happen with revenue. Our policy is in alignment with the county's financial policies, and that's a 60-day reserve in our operating funds. So 60 days of our operating expenses is budgeted as contingency. For construction, we typically budget 25% of the construction costs as contingency. We don't usually access contingency. The exception is a minor amount that we accessed for surface water projects a couple of years ago. We also had to access contingency in 2021 for about $40,000 for special payments as we had higher growth than expected, which increased those costs. But generally, we budget so that contingency is then incorporated into the ending fund balance at year end. So when we get to the end of the fiscal year, that chart on the right shows what we have left. And it is to some degree a measure of how accurately we budget too, because if we were forecasting revenues and expenditures perfectly and coming in perfectly in alignment with those, our 24-25 projected days operating reserves would be 80 in the sewer fund and 225 in the surface water fund. The fact that we're over that means that we had revenues that came in a little bit higher because we conservatively budget those, and we're having expenses that come in a little bit lower, about 3.6% based on our projections as of now. In prior years, we were maintaining a higher fund balance in the surface water operating fund because we didn't have a stormwater master plan or an adopted capital plan for stormwater infrastructure. You can see that we brought down the balance in 22-23 and 23-24 as we're starting to make higher transfers over to surface water construction. But that provides a measure of measure against risk to have that money on hand just in case we didn't get any revenue. We would have enough reserves in our operating funds to provide for our immediate needs. Next slide, please. All right, so transitioning to revenue. This is all of WES's revenue sources, and you can see the relative size and the trends for these. About 90% of our revenues are from sewer and surface water changes, as well as system development charges. The balance is interest income, and then all other revenues, which represent charges for miscellaneous fees, such as septic fees, planning review fees, lien search fees, just those minor revenue items. They make up a relatively small portion. So sewer and surface water charges are very predictable. And you can see the dashed orange budget line is almost exactly over the green projection bar. So we can project those with pretty high precision. Because most of our sewer charges are billed on a fixed rate basis. More than 90% of our customers are residential and billed fixed rate. We have a little bit of revenue that fluctuates with commercial account activity. All of our surface water charges are fixed rate basis. So as long as our population projections, our growth projections are pretty accurate, which they have been, we're pretty accurate in terms of the overall revenue forecast. System development charges depend on underlying development activity. So we base our projection for those on anticipated growth multiplied by the proposed SDC fees. If anticipated growth doesn't occur as we project, those charges don't come in as expected. And we've seen lower development activity, as shared earlier, the last couple of years. So we're coming in under budget this year for that. Interest income is just a product of the interest rates that we're earning and the fund balance that we're earning those rates on. So interest rates increased over the past 4 years due to actions by the Federal Reserve. We were projecting that those would start to come down. That hasn't happened. They've remained high. So we've been able to earn a lot of interest over the past few years, which has been great. It's additional resources that we're able to put to work in capital investments and operating. All other revenues, it's such a minor category. We do have an initiative in our strategic plan to adopt updated miscellaneous charges, and we're on track to complete that this June with some miscellaneous fee adjustments that are going to the board for adoption then. We don't anticipate a lot of change in overall revenue there, but we are always looking to ensure that we're equitably recovering the cost of providing the service to the individuals that benefit from that specific service. So that's kind of what we're looking to do with all other revenues. Next slide, please. So these are the charts that show the underlying factors. So you can see the population estimate and then monthly rates.
Sorry,
which are
Erin,
yeah.
Christopher has a
Oh.
question.
Yeah, sorry, Christopher, please go ahead.
I try not to interrupt you when you're on a roll, Aaron. It's too slow. My question was about the previous slide. I really like that figure. And I was sort of, as I was looking at it, I was observing the surface water charges, the rate of increase is less or lower than the rate of increase for sewer charges. And it just had me kind of thinking or wondering, I think from the advisory committee, you've heard that we support surface water CIP capital projects. And I was curious, well, and you've also got surface water master plan, I think, in the works. And so I was curious, like, how are you considering balancing, I think, this enhanced prioritization of surface water projects with maybe this reduced increase in revenues comparatively? Is that something that's going to have to change over time, do you think, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we did have a lower increase that we adopted for both sewer and surface water back in 21-22. Due to the pandemic, we chose to go with an inflationary only adjustment that year. And then since then, we've been adopting 5% increases to both the surface water and the sewer charge rates. We actually had about a 5.5% increase in surface water charges. It's a little hard to tell on this slide because the scale favors the larger shifts in sewer charge revenue compared to the relatively lower shifts in surface water charges. But in terms of long-range forecasting, we maintain a separate model for surface water, and 5% rate increases are adequate to fully fund the capital projects that we've identified in our stormwater master plan and provide for increases on the operating side aligned with our assumptions that we use for the sewer fund. So what we haven't incorporated that might have an impact in the future is additional staffing that we may need for surface water as our service area continues to grow or if levels of service increase. So that isn't incorporated in here. We update our financial model every year. And if it did look like we needed a higher adjustment there, we would come to this committee, of course, and look to get some advice and support for that.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So, so for the top, that's really the underlying factors in the sewer charges and the surface water charges. The lower left shows new sanitary sewer connections by fiscal year, which is the driver for system development charges. You can see how that factors in there. And then our lower right shows why we've had increases in interest income over the past couple of years. We've had fund balance increases, of course, both from issuing debt and collecting interest on those proceeds. And then the interest rates have increased dramatically since early 2022. We did so well on our debt issuance that we actually have an arbitrage rebate payment that's owed to the federal government. So we earned more interest than the tax yield on the bond. So we have to rebate that additional earnings to the federal government this upcoming fiscal year. Next slide, please. Okay, so transitioning to rates, and Greg already touched on this. So the board did support a modification of the advisory committee recommendation to phase in the SDC fees to their full calculated rates. They just wanted to go with a slower phase in of 10 years versus 5. And then they also wanted to revisit in a year. So we have a public hearing scheduled for August 14th. We welcome this committee's input. We sent notices out to our city partners and the HBA yesterday. We also posted the notice on WES's website. So we're just trucking along on the statutory requirements to ensure that we're ready to adopt that methodology in August. Next slide, please. In terms of rates for services, this shows the projection for proposed rate increases for next fiscal year. So we are looking at 5%. We round our increases to the nearest nickel for administrative ease. So that's why you see a little bit of variation around that 5% figure. Next slide, please. There are 2 additional adjustments that factor into the final rate that a resident of a city or one of WES's service areas will pay. And that's the legacy debt component, which represents collections for debt that was incurred by CCSD number 1 before the WES partnership was formed. Under the founding orders of WES, only rate zone 2 ratepayers pay for that debt service. And so there's a differential included in their rate that's called this legacy debt component. And that creates a difference in the total rates charged for the same services. We have started phasing this out. We've been phasing this out for the past 5 years and should have it fully phased out by 2030-31. So that's why you see a reduction there in what we're charging. Right-of-way fees are assessed by some of our cities based on their row ordinances for utilities that operate within their rights of way. So WES does add a differential charge to the rates for the customers in those cities to recover the cost of each city's row fee. And those rates, those differentials are set based on the underlying row fee percentage. So Gladstone and Happy Valley both have a 5% row fee, and Oregon City has a 6%. The way that works is WES collects those revenues from the cities and from ratepayers in Happy Valley, and then we turn around and we remit the fees back to the cities each quarter. Next slide, please. So you can see the overall changes in rates proposed for each service area and city for next fiscal year. You can see how the legacy debt component decreasing offsets a portion of the increase in the other components. And then also the overall monthly bill increase compared to the total projected monthly bill for 25-26. So there is a difference in the row fees. The row fee differential, we round to the nearest 5% for administrative efficiency as well. So Oregon City's row fee differential is not going up this year. Gladstone's is going up by 10 cents just due to the way that the rounding works. So Oregon City gets a little bit less of an increase for this upcoming fiscal year compared to the base increase. Next slide, please. And then looking at our neighboring agencies, the average monthly rate for sewer is about $60.55. That's up from $59 about a year ago. WES's rates are below average for our rate zone 2 retail customers and rate zone 1 retail customers. The cities add collection to their rates that they charge to recover the costs of operating their local sewer collection systems, but their rates are right in line with the averages as well. Next slide, please. On the surface water side, both WES's rate zone 2 and rate zone 3 retail surface water rates are well below the average. And this, we don't necessarily set rates to be below the average, but we are trying to maintain affordable services. And this is one of the ways that we benchmark against neighboring jurisdictions. And we could see some higher increases, as Christopher was asking about, if we do have more sizable capital needs on the surface water side or additional operational needs. Next slide, please. So even with rates being below the regional average, affordability is subjective. So rates might still be unaffordable for a lower income household. So one of the things that we like to talk about in conjunction with rate increases is affordability and our customer assistance programs. We have 2 initiatives in WES's strategic plan that are focused on affordability, and those are both detailed to the right there. The lowest quintile residential indicator was introduced by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2020. Prior to introducing that, the affordability metric was % of median household income. And median income isn't a great measure of the affordability of utility fees for lower income households. So in 2020, the EPA proposed this alternate measure, which is where we assess the affordability based on the lowest 20% of household incomes in our service area. Our goal is to maintain an impact of no more than 2%, so a low impact or a mid impact rating, and we've been able to do that for the last 3 years. Additional performance metric that isn't on this slide is to increase awareness and utilization of our customer assistance programs. We're initially aiming for 1% of accounts due to restrictions in our current low income discount program. LID program criteria was updated. Later low income discount program criteria was updated in fiscal year 23-24. And we were able to expand eligibility and increase our enrollments from 152 to 221 over the last year and a half, which is a 45% increase, but we're still below expected numbers. And we think our program is underutilized as we aren't able to extend it to renters. We can only extend it to the property owners. So one of the initiatives is to update that low income discount program to make it more accessible and eligible. And next slide, please. And that's a super exciting project. So we threw this slide in there because we wanted to talk about it. And we have a dedicated cross-functional team of about 10 people in WES that are working on this. We kicked the project off in March. We've been doing research and thinking about this long before that. We are currently in the program and policy drafting phase. We've met with other utility providers, including PGE's Customer Assistance Program Manager. We have a lot of exciting ideas about how to increase the access to our program, about potential partnerships with other utilities, about ways to expand our outreach, and about ways to change the program so that it's easier for the folks that are enrolling in it, and also increasing assistance to cover things like one-time crises. And so lots of ideas. We wanted to provide this update with you. We'll be coming back probably in August to get feedback from our city partners. Most of our city partners will pass WES's discount through to their customers. So we want to ensure that we have input from our city partners for any proposals that we're considering for this program. We are on track to implement the new program in January 2026. Lots to be done between now and then in terms of legal review and internal approval and getting approval from our board. But this is exciting, and you will surely be hearing more about it as we share more about it over the coming months. Next slide, please. So what's ahead of us? From a financial picture, it looks like this, and there's a lot going on here. We show some version of this slide every year towards the tail end of our budget update. The bars represent our annual expenditures consisting of operating, debt, and capital expenses. You can see from the tan bar at the bottom that we have a steady increase in operating expenses. It averages about 4.5% per year. It's based on a projection of about 4.9% for the next 2 years. That comes down to about 4.3% as we start to see labor costs relax in 27-28 and further out. Capital expenses, the blue bars, are based on our adopted CIP as well as the 10-year extended spending projections. It represents a total of $454 million over the next 10 years, indexed at 3% per year. The green solid line represents our revenues. You can see there's a little bit of an inflection in 26-27. That's due to interest income, which we expect will go down as interest rates go down and as we start to spend down our fund balance. And then it picks up a pretty steady increase based on increases in growth in our service area, and then 5% annual adjustments to our rates each year. This does not factor in any more than a 3% increase in our system development charge fees based on long-range planning assumptions that sync up the 3% index that we use for capital expenses. The blue dashed line represents reserves. So we're starting off and then we spend down that line over the next few years to deliver the projects in our capital plan and then start to issue debt in 27-28. So we're a couple of years off from needing to issue new debt. We may be able to push that out to 28, 29, depending on how the market's looking at that time. When we get down to base reserve levels, that's in about 29, 30. You can see reserves kind of taper off and then they start to climb again as our debt issuances go down and our capital spending starts to relax in 32 and 33 and onward. So this is kind of a visual representation of us fully funding our capital plan, meeting operating and maintenance expenses, as well as debt service requirements, maintaining a base level of reserves in alignment with our financial policies, and maintaining a steady source of revenue. So it conveys a lot of numbers in a relatively small amount of space. Next slide, please. And this is a financial forecast that you've seen for monthly sewer charges. The only difference from prior years is that we've added 2035 to the end. So it's looking one more year out. We're still aligned with 5% rate increases to fully meet revenue requirements. Next slide, please. So while we aren't able to receive any feedback on the budget specifically in this meeting, we do value and encourage your input. And if you have comments or questions that you'd like to be considered by the Budget Committee, please submit those directly to WES staff by the end of the day next Monday, May 19th. Feel free to email me or Ron or Greg, and we'll ensure that we compile responses to those and then put that in the material that we share with the Budget Committee when they meet on May 27th. On May 27th, the Budget Committee will have our formal Budget Committee meeting. It's at the DSB. It will be at 9:45 a.m. It's being offered both virtually and in person. If you can attend in person, we'd love to have you. If you can attend virtually, that would be fantastic too. If you just want to watch a recording afterwards, that's also great. Once the Budget Committee deliberates on the budget, they'll discuss any potential changes and then they'll vote to approve the budget. At that point, the final step in the process is for the Board of County Commissioners as WES's governing body to adopt the budget in June. And next slide. All right, that is it.
Thank you, Aaron. That was a great presentation. Very thorough. So do we have any other questions that weren't asked during the presentation? Yeah, you did such a good job that I can't imagine we... William, do you have a question?
I want to apologize that the fire district budget went over so long, and I'm out of that, and I will be watching this this recording as soon as it's available.
Very good. Okay. Oh, I got some questions. Councilor Golubay, you have a question? And then...
Yeah, not a question. I just want to say on behalf of the city of Happy Valley, we truly are thankful for the partnership that we have with WES and two of these interceptor projects that are absolutely critical for the future of the city of Happy Valley. And I know that these are on our list here. And I just want to say on behalf of the Happy Valley that we really do appreciate the partnership that we have with WES. It's not very often where government agencies work closely hand in hand together, and we truly appreciate the efforts that WES is doing, and we thank you for this work.
Good point. Mayor Milch, you had a question or a comment?
Well, I'm sure the city of Gladstone feels the same way as the city of Happy Valley. It's been a great partnership. I wanted to go back to one slide you had earlier when you were showing trends on materials and services, and you were showing that the actual expenses in several categories were exceeding the budget. Will the board be required to do some kind of budget modification before the end of the fiscal year to account for those overages, or is that not done in this case?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So materials and services is appropriated in its entirety. So although we are going to be over the budget within materials and services, we aren't over the budget total in materials and services. So a contingency transfer or a supplemental budget isn't necessary in this case, but that's a great point.
Let's see. Okay.
I did have one, sorry.
Okay, William.
It's perhaps it's just a nit, but that's me. on page 2 of the introductory letter, the budget message, the last paragraph says ratepayer funds cover all costs. And I don't think that's accurate. And I'd like that. And there's references on page 7 and 14, especially on page 75 to refute that all. I think it's not all costs, but certainly the majority.
Thank you, William. That's good feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing nothing else, right? We'll move on to the next item, which is advisory committee report outs or any items that you wish to see presented in future meetings. Do we have anything? Okay, I have a couple, but nobody else has anything else. Otherwise, we'll be done way too early. So I have two things. I mentioned last month that I was going to travel back to Washington, D.C., and I did at the end of March for the unveiling of the 2025 American Society of Civil Engineers report card on America's infrastructure. And I participated. I was a speaker and a facilitator on a couple of panels that I also did. And the overall grade was a C, and you may have seen stuff like that. It was on the national news several different times. And then following that, there were 5 of us from Oregon. We met with our delegation, and one of the meetings was with Senator Merkley. And many of you probably have done these, and a lot of times you actually don't meet with the elected official. You meet with the chief of staff, who actually does all the work anyway. But in this case, Senator Merkley wanted to meet with us bad enough that he had us meet with him in the Capitol where he was working. We actually met in the Senate reception area, which was quite an ornate facility there. His point to meeting with us was he wanted stories. He wanted to know what is happening and what's affecting Oregonians in the infrastructure field as a result of the change in the administration. And so we were able, because he's pretty, honestly, he's pretty upset about what's going on, and he made no bones about it when he was talking to us in the meeting. So there were some observations given to him. Whether they'll help him or not, I don't know. The second item is next Wednesday, I've been asked to go down and be a speaker and a panelist for the California Water Resources Board's conference in Sacramento. And the topic they're talking about, Aaron, is affordability for utility rates. So my part of the panel will be to talk about infrastructure and the overall cost to Americans and that sort of thing that I've talked about with you folks before. But it's an all-day event, and they've got quite a few people to talk about water utility affordability. And so, I may even learn something from the whole thing. So, Neil, to report out.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you a question about your DC visit.
Okay.
So the 6 people, the steering committee for the 6 PPDQ working group has a meeting tomorrow with Merkley's staff regarding the transportation authorization bill that's coming up. And I was curious kind of really what you were hearing just in general in your visit as to kind of where the wiggle room might be. Obviously, this is, again, there's been a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty. And I'm just curious what you were hearing.
Yeah, well, when it comes to infrastructure, and this is why I've always enjoyed going back there, it's a bipartisan issue. It's not one of those where we get beat up when we go in to see those folks, and so even the uncertainty that's happening right now, we didn't hear any pushback on any of the infrastructure. The water bill, which Water Resources Development Recovery. Yeah, for the folks that don't know, that one's gone through, and so there wasn't any pushback on that. Transportation, the only thing we hear, the big pushback is, how do you pay for it, right? Everybody's trying to come up with the perfect way to pay for it, understanding that the Transportation Highway Trust Fund is broke. And so that slows things down. The issues that we were hearing, and they weren't so much with us, but were of concern, were some of the policies that the administration has adopted, around some of more of the social programs that related to infrastructure. Okay. And that tends to be where more the effort is, but that tended to be more administration than our delegation. And our delegation, remember, for the most part, save one, is all Democrats. So we're in the minority back in Washington, D.C. right now. And I think that's probably the other frustration that the senator experiences working back there.
Thank you.
You bet. Anything else?
Question in the chat from Christina about your presentation on utility affordability. Would you be able to share it with the group?
I can. Yeah, I'd be happy to when I get done. Again, my part of it isn't going to be on utility affordability as much as it's going to be on the grades that Water Resources got in the report card, and the amount of money that it's going to cost to close the gap, and the effect that not funding our infrastructure has on our economy. But yes, I'd be happy, Chris, I'll send it to you, slides and all, and yeah, share it with everybody. It'd be great to pass it around.
That's great. I just had one thing. Mayor Milch, you were talking about the retaining employees and all of that. And I just wanted to mention that in the last couple of years, we've had returning employees. So quite a few returning employees, which I think speaks very highly. So word spread. WES is a great place to work.
Found out the grass wasn't as greener on the other side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, our next meeting is 2 months from now in July, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there is something on that you want on the agenda, be sure to get that to Chris and a topic we want to talk about. Otherwise, we're talking capital improvements next time. Is that right?
Yeah, capital improvements are kind of a preview, and then also if anybody has advice or the lunch and learn, we've got a lunch and learn that we'll be scheduling here pretty soon. So if anyone has any topics or of interest that they'd like to hear more about, that would be great.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we will talk to you again in July. The meeting's adjourned.
Good to see everybody.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.